She wore yellow. That is the first thing 65 days of waiting looked like when it finally arrived on a Monday morning in New York City. Not a press release, not a law enforcement update, not a break in the case. Just a woman in a yellow dress walking through the doors of Studio 1A at Rockefeller Center at 7 o'clock in the morning, sitting down at a desk she has occupied for 14 years, and saying 4 words into a camera that was broadcasting to tens of millions of people across the country. It is good to be home. The yellow was not accidental. Nothing about this morning was accidental. The dress Savannah Guthrie chose to wear on the most emotionally freighted day of her professional career was the same color as the ribbons people have been tying around trees in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona for 65 days. The same color as the flowers left by strangers who drove to a quiet neighborhood they had never visited before and placed something bright and alive near a front step where blood was found on the morning of February 1st. The same color as the pins worn by fans who drove to Rockefeller Center before sunrise on a Monday morning in April to stand outside a television studio and hold signs for a woman they have never met whose mother is still missing. Yellow has become the color of this case, of this waiting, of the particular kind of hope that is not optimism, not the confident expectation that things will work out, but the stubborn, active, daily insistence on remaining present in a situation that offers no resolution and no relief. The yellow ribbons in Tucson say, "We have not forgotten." The yellow dress in New York says, "I have not broken." The yellow tie that Craig Melvin chose to wear sitting next to Savannah Guthrie said the same thing from the desk of the most watched morning show in America. We have not forgotten. We are still here. We are still waiting. This is Forensic Disconnect. And this is day 65, the day Savannah came back. The day tens of millions of Americans watched a woman sit at a desk and do the hardest thing she has ever done in her professional life. Not the complicated legal cases she has covered, not the Supreme Court arguments she has analyzed, not the presidential debates she has moderated, not the breaking news she has delivered at 5 in the morning on no sleep in the middle of a national crisis, but simply showing up, walking through a door, sitting in a chair, looking at a camera and saying, "Ready or not, let's do the news." Before we go any further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We are here every single day covering this case, the investigative days and the forensic days and the legal days, and the days when what needs to be covered is a woman in yellow saying 4 words into a camera while her mother is still missing. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because tomorrow, Tuesday, April 7th, is going to be one of the most significant days this investigation has seen since the FBI released the doorbell camera footage in February. Sheriff Chris Nanos will sit before the Pima County Board of Supervisors and testify under oath about his record, his management of this department, and the decisions made in the first hours of this investigation that a former FBI agent said cannot be recovered. That hearing begins tomorrow, and we will be here for every word of it. Now, let's go back to the beginning of this morning. Not to the moment Savannah walked through the doors, though we will get there, but to the night before. Because to understand what this morning actually meant, you need to understand what happened on Easter Sunday. On the evening of April 5th, 2026, the night before her return to the Today Show, Savannah Guthrie recorded a video message for Good Shepherd, New York, the church she attends in Manhattan. It was a digital Easter gathering. It was not a press event. It was not a media opportunity. It was a woman speaking to her faith community on the most significant holy day of the Christian calendar, in the most difficult personal season of her life, about what it actually feels like to sit inside a faith tradition that promises resurrection while living inside an experience that offers no resolution of any kind. She did not speak in platitudes. She did not deliver the polished, carefully managed public statement that her communications team might have preferred. She spoke with the theological precision of someone who has spent 65 days arguing with God and has not yet reached a conclusion. She said, "We celebrate today the promise of a new life that never ends in death. But standing here today, I have to tell you, there are moments in which that promise seems irretrievably far away, when life itself seems far harder than death." She talked about what theologians call desolation, the specific spiritual experience of feeling not just abandoned by circumstances, but abandoned by God. She said there are moments of deep disappointment with God, the feeling of utter abandonment. These are not words that most public figures say in public. They are the words of someone who has decided that authenticity is more important than protection, And then she said something that became the single most precise description of what it means to live inside this particular kind of loss that has been spoken aloud since this case began. She said, "In my own season of trial, I have wondered. I have questioned whether Jesus really ever experienced this particular wound that I feel, this grievous and uniquely cruel injury of not knowing, of uncertainty and confusion, and answers withheld. The injury of not knowing." Sit with that phrase for a moment. Not grief, because grief, as devastating as it is, has an object. Grief knows what it has lost. It can name the absence. It can hold a funeral. It can visit a grave. It can say, "She was here, and now she is gone, and I miss her." The injury of not knowing cannot do any of those things. The injury of not knowing has no object, no ceremony, no permission to mourn, because mourning implies an ending, and there is no ending. There is only the continuation of uncertainty, the daily, hourly, minute-by-minute maintenance of a state of suspension in which the worst possibility and the best possibility coexist, and neither one can be resolved. That is what Savannah Guthrie has been living inside for 65 days, not knowing whether her mother is alive, not knowing whether she is suffering, not knowing whether she is afraid or cold or in pain, or whether she has already passed beyond the reach of pain entirely, not knowing whether the investigation will find her or whether it will eventually, quietly, without ceremony, move to a cold case file on a shelf somewhere. The injury of not knowing. That is what she named on Easter Sunday. And then, the next morning, she put on a yellow dress and went to work. The decision to return was not arrived at quickly or easily. We know this because she described the process in her interview with Hoda Kotb that aired at the end of March. She said, "It is hard to imagine doing it because it is such a place of joy and lightness." She said, "I can't come back and try to be something that I am not." She said, "I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'll belong anymore, but I would like to try. I would like to try." That repetition, "I would like to try, I would like to try," is not the language of confidence. It is the language of someone who is committing to an attempt without any certainty about the outcome, who is deciding to walk through a door without knowing what they will find on the other side, or whether the version of themselves that emerges from that door will resemble the version that entered. She also said something that had been circling her public statements since the beginning, and that crystallized in this interview into its most direct form. She said, "My joy will be my protest." She said, "My joy will be my answer." That is a theology of resistance. The idea that joy, not happiness, not pretending things are fine, but genuine, hard-won, daily chosen joy, is not a betrayal of grief, but a defiance of whoever caused it. That to smile when someone has tried to break you is not weakness or denial, but the most direct possible statement of refusal. You took my mother. You will not take my joy. You will not take my work. You will not take the desk I have sat at for 14 years, and the colleagues who are my family, and the viewers who have been with me for a decade and a half. My joy will be my protest. She had also, in the weeks before her return, made one other statement that deserves careful attention. She said, and this is the statement that has haunted every person following this case since she said it, "I fear that I brought this to her bedside, that it is because of me." And she looked at the camera and said, "I just want to say I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." The terror of that possibility, that a person's own prominence, their own career, their own face on a television screen that tens of millions of people recognize, became the reason that someone identified their mother as a target, is a specific and devastating kind of guilt that has no relief available to it. Because the prominence cannot be undone, the career cannot be erased, the face cannot be made unrecognizable, and the question of whether any of it contributed to what happened on January 31st in a house in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona, is a question that may never have a confirmed answer. Now let's talk about what the morning actually looked like, because the details matter. Savannah Guthrie has been a co-anchor of the Today Show since 2012, 14 years. She has been part of the morning ritual of millions of American households for longer than some of her viewers have been in high school. She has covered presidential elections and Supreme Court decisions and natural disasters and public health crises and the full spectrum of what it means to deliver the news of the world to people who are eating breakfast and getting children ready for school and starting their days. She has done this from that desk, in that studio, with those colleagues, in front of that camera, for 14 years. The last time she sat at that desk was Friday, January 30th, 2026, 2 days before her sister called, 2 days before the Sunday morning that changed everything. That Friday, like every Friday before it, She went through the show, delivered the news, said goodbye to viewers, went home, and expected to come back the following Monday. She did not come back the following Monday, or the Monday after that, or the Monday after that. For 65 days, 9 Mondays, 9 weeks plus 2 days, the desk had someone else at it. Hoda Kotb, her predecessor and close friend, filled in for much of that time. The show continued. The morning ritual continued for the 3 million people who watch it every day. But the face was different. The energy was different. Something was missing. This morning, it was not missing. Savannah Guthrie walked through the doors of Studio 1A at 7 a.m. Eastern Time on April 6, 2026. She was wearing the yellow dress. Craig Melvin was at the desk waiting for her, wearing the yellow tie and yellow pocket square and yellow ribbon. The studio crew, people who have worked alongside her for years, who know her rhythms and her timing and her ability to hold a broadcast together, were there. The cameras were rolling. The nation was watching. She opened the show. Good morning. Welcome to today on this Monday morning. We are so glad you started your week with us, and it is good to be home. Craig Melvin said, "It is good to have you back at home." And then she said 5 more words that set the tone for everything that followed. She said, "Well, here we go. Ready or not, ready or not. Let's do the news." Those are not words of triumph. They are not the words of a person who has arrived at the other side of something and emerged whole and resolved and ready to celebrate their own resilience. They are the words of someone who is showing up anyway, who is doing the thing not because it is comfortable or easy or because they feel prepared for it, but because the work is there and the colleagues are there and the viewers are there and the alternative. Not showing up, letting the desk stay empty, letting the injury of not knowing keep her from the place she has called home for 14 years, is not acceptable, ready or not. That is what 65 days of the injury of not knowing produces in a person who refuses to be broken by it. Not readiness, not resolution, not healing, just ready or not. We go anyway. The first 25 minutes of the broadcast were almost entirely professional. She covered the war in Iran, the conflict that has dominated American foreign policy news for weeks, and that she delivered with the same clarity and authority she has always brought to complex breaking news. She covered gas prices and cold weather in the Midwest and the Artemis II mission to space and March Madness. At the end of the first block, she offered Melvin a high five. He took it. The show moved on. She greeted Al Roker when he appeared at the weather wall. She said, "Good morning, sunshine." Roker blew her a kiss from across the studio and said, "Good to see you, my dear." Just like that. As if no time had passed, as if the 14-year history of that studio was strong enough to absorb 65 days of absence and present itself again, intact, on the other side. None of the first 30 minutes directly addressed Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The show did not open with a tribute segment. There was no package about the investigation, no update on the tip lines, no conversation with law enforcement. The case was present in the room, present in the yellow, present in the awareness of everyone watching, present in the carefully managed professionalism of a broadcast that was clearly built to let Savannah set the tone, but it was not the subject of the broadcast. This was a deliberate choice, and it was the right one. A broadcast that had opened with extensive coverage of the investigation, that had foregrounded Savannah's grief and made it the centerpiece of the return, would have been exploitative in a way that undermined exactly what her return was supposed to demonstrate, that the work continues, that the news continues, that the institution of morning television in America, the daily ritual of sitting down with the news over breakfast, is not derailed by the worst things that happen to the people who deliver it. The Today Show has a specific and particular place in American culture that most people do not fully appreciate until they examine it. It is not simply a news program. It invented the concept of morning television in 1952 and has been doing it for 74 years. It is the programming anchor around which the rest of NBC News organizes itself. It generated $203.5 million in advertising revenue in 2025. It averaged 3.1 million viewers per day for the first 3 months of 2026, up nearly 9% from the previous year, surpassing Good Morning America for the first time in years. It is, in the language of television economics, the financial linchpin of a news organization. It is also, for millions of people, the first voice they hear every morning. The reliable presence that tells them what is happening in the world and gives them the informational context they need to start their day. When that presence is disrupted, when the face that has been there for 14 years is suddenly, without warning, gone, it creates a gap that the audience feels in a way that is genuinely difficult to articulate. but genuinely real. 3 million people a day noticed that Savannah was not there. And this morning, 3 million people plus whoever tuned in specifically for the return, analysts expected the number to be significantly higher, watched her come back. The emotions that had been held at professional distance during the first hour of the broadcast broke through in the second hour. Not at the desk. Outside, at Rockefeller Plaza, the open airspace in front of the studio where Today fans gather every morning, regardless of weather, holding signs and waving at cameras and being part of the broadcast in the way that only Today fans know how to be. This morning they were wearing yellow ribbons on their coats. They were holding signs, some with Savannah's name, some with Nancy's photo, some with messages of support that had clearly been made at home the night before by people who wanted to be part of this moment in whatever way they could. One woman, her face visible through the studio window as the cameras panned the crowd, was wearing a t-shirt that read, "Welcome home, Savannah." Savannah walked out to the plaza holding Jenna Bush Hager's hand. Jenna had already said, inside the studio, the line that will be quoted in every recap of this broadcast, "We don't even need a boost today because we have our sunshine back." She said it while holding Savannah's hand. And when they walked outside and Savannah saw the crowd, the yellow ribbons, the signs, the woman in the welcome home shirt, she fought back tears. She said, "These signs are so beautiful. You guys have been so beautiful. I've received so many letters, so much kindness to me and my whole family. We feel it. We feel your prayers. Thank you so much." And then Al Roker, the man who has stood at the weather wall of that studio since 1996, who has been a daily presence in American households for longer than some of the people watching this broadcast have been alive, who has survived his own serious medical crises with the particular kind of public grace that comes from having nothing left to hide, noticed that Savannah was becoming overwhelmed, and he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his pocket square, and he handed it to her. "This is such a nice pocket square," Savannah said. "I don't want to slobber on it." The crowd erupted, not in the polite, restrained way that morning show audiences typically respond, but in the full-throated way that people respond when something genuinely funny happens in the middle of something genuinely heartbreaking. The humor was not a deflection from the emotion. It was the emotion, the specific, particular, entirely human way that grief and humor coexist in people who have decided to keep living their lives in spite of everything that has been done to them. That moment, Al Roker and the pocket square, the crowd in yellow outside a television studio at 7:30 in the morning, the humor breaking through the tears in front of 30 million people, is not a footnote to this case. It is a chapter. It is the chapter about what it looks like when a country decides that a story matters and refuses to let it go. When the ordinary routines of an ordinary Tuesday morning television broadcast become the vessel for something far larger than entertainment or information, become the public expression of a national community that has been waiting for 65 days, alongside a woman who has been waiting alone. Now we need to talk about the investigative dimension of this return, because there is one. It is not abstract. It is documented in the history of comparable cases and confirmed by the former law enforcement officials who have been speaking publicly about this investigation since February. Every time Savannah Guthrie has made a significant public appearance since Nancy's disappearance, the tip lines have seen an increase in volume. This was confirmed obliquely by former FBI agent Harry Trombitas, who said in an interview that the timing of Savannah's appearance with Hoda Kotb was probably not coincidental, that it was most likely coordinated between the sheriff's office, the FBI, and the Guthrie family. He said that among the goals of such an appearance are to humanize Nancy as a person, to persuade the suspects to do the right thing, and to keep the case in the public eye. Keeping the case in the public eye is not just a media strategy, it is an investigative tool. The FBI tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI, exists because information exists in the public that investigators do not have access to. Someone in Tucson saw a vehicle they did not think to mention. Someone who does odd jobs in the Catalina Foothills remembers a conversation they assumed was irrelevant. Someone who sold supplies or rented a space or provided a service heard or saw something in the days before January 31st that did not register as significant until this case became national news and they started paying attention. That person has been sitting with that detail for 65 days. Maybe they looked at the tip line and decided their information wasn't important enough to bother. Maybe they told themselves they were probably wrong. Maybe they called once, early on, and the line was busy or the wait was long and they didn't call back. And maybe today, watching Savannah Guthrie stand in front of Rockefeller Plaza holding a pocket square and trying not to cry in front of 30 million people, they picked up the phone. One call is all it takes. That is not a platitude. It is the documented history of how kidnapping cases are broken. The Golden State Killer was identified because of a genealogy database and a detective who never stopped pulling the thread. Brian Kohberger was identified through forensic genetic genealogy built from a partial DNA profile. Neither of those cases was solved by a single dramatic breakthrough. They were solved by accumulated detail, by the patient assembly of information from multiple sources over extended periods of time, by the fundamental investigative reality that information exists in the world, and the job is to find it. Today was a day when the world was reminded to look. When 30 million people who have been following this case were given a reason, emotional, visceral, impossible to ignore, to think about whether they know something and to act on that thought. Now, let's move forward 24 hours. Because as significant as today was, tomorrow may be the day that historians of this investigation point to as the moment when the institutional accountability for what happened in those first 33 days finally began. Tomorrow, Tuesday, April 7th, Sheriff Chris Nanos will sit before the Pima County Board of Supervisors and testify under oath. Let that land for a moment. The man who has been the public face of this investigation. The man who stood at press conferences for 65 days and delivered updates and made statements and declared people cleared and told reporters he had no regrets. The man whose department treated a kidnapping as a search and rescue in the first critical hours. The man whose lead detective had never worked a homicide case. The man who resigned from his first police job in El Paso in 1982 rather than face termination for kicking a suspected robber in the head hard enough to put him in the ICU. That man will sit before the elected officials who govern the county he serves and answer questions under oath with consequences for false testimony. The Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to compel this testimony. Unanimously. Every member of the board that governs Pima County decided that this was necessary. They did not make that decision lightly. They invoked a law that has not been used in over a century, a territorial-era provision that existed before Arizona was even a state, because the standard tools of oversight were insufficient for what they needed to examine. What they needed to examine is the accumulation of revelations that is built over 65 days into a documented portrait of institutional failure at the highest levels of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. The crime scene that former Sheriff Richard Carmona, who held this same office, who trained at this department, who knows its capabilities from the inside, said was corrupted. A pizza delivery car drove across the front lawn of the crime scene during the active investigation. Evidence that should have been isolated and preserved was accessible to foot traffic and vehicle traffic that should never have been permitted. The lead detective, who had never worked a homicide case, who was assigned the most complex kidnapping investigation in Arizona history, the case that became the most watched missing persons case in America within 48 hours of Nancy's disappearance, and led it for 33 days without the experience that this case demanded from its very first hour. The wandered-off assumption. The source who told News Nation that investigators initially treated this as a search and rescue, that they rushed to the judgment that Nancy had wandered away from her home and ran the investigation from that framework rather than treating it as the violent crime that the blood on the front step and the disabled camera and the propped-open back doors should have immediately signaled it to be. The 33 days without a task force. The resources that were not deployed, the federal infrastructure that was not utilized, the depth of investigative experience that was not brought to bear until a full month after Nancy disappeared, the public clearances. Former prosecutor Matt Murphy's critique that Nanos repeatedly made prosecutorial declarations announcing on national television that specific individuals had been cleared that he had no legal authority to make. Declarations that a defense attorney in any future prosecution can use to create reasonable doubt, regardless of the evidence. The no-regret statement. Asked by reporters whether he had any regrets about the crime scene, the rookie detective, the 33 days without a task force, Nanos said, "I have no regrets about my team and their efforts. I don't regret that we let the crime scene go too soon or any of that." Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer responded publicly and directly. She said, "There is no way for Sheriff Nanos to recover from his errors in this case." She said, "The biggest error he made was not putting his best of the best on Nancy's case from the beginning." She said, "There are no crime scene do-overs. There is no way to recover the first 48 hours of an investigation." And then she said, "Meanwhile, porch guy walks free. And if I were rich, over 60, and living in Arizona, I would be pretty worried." Tomorrow, Nanos will be asked to answer for all of it, under oath, in a public proceeding, before the people of Pima County. His answers may not change what has already happened. They cannot recover the first 48 hours. They cannot uncorrupt the crime scene. They cannot give the lead detective the homicide experience he did not have. They cannot undo the public clearances or the no-regret statement. What is done, and Jennifer Coffindaffer is correct that it cannot be undone. But accountability and recovery are different things. The hearing tomorrow is not about recovery. It is about accountability, about the public record, about the formal, legal, sworn documentation of what happened and why and who made the decisions that shaped this investigation's first 33 days. That record will matter when this case eventually reaches a courtroom. It will matter to the family of Nancy Guthrie, and it will matter to the history of how this investigation was conducted, whatever its ultimate resolution. Because the investigation is not over. The DNA is in a laboratory. The forensic genetic genealogy process that identified Brian Koberger, that built a family tree from a partial genetic match and narrowed it to a single individual, is being applied to the mixed DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home. C.C. Moore, who has solved more than 300 cases with this technique, has said that if a viable profile can be extracted, the person will be identified. The Bitcoin trail is being followed. Cybersecurity expert Ari Redboard said this week that the FBI considers the cryptocurrency infrastructure behind the ransom notes their single best lead. That crypto is the ultimate crime scene. That every transaction is traceable, trackable, and immutable. That it is there forever. The person who created that wallet, who sent those notes, who built the ransom infrastructure for this abduction, believed they were invisible. They were not. The tip lines are open. The reward is over $1 million. Anonymous means anonymous. One call is all it takes. And tomorrow morning, the man running the investigation will sit under oath and answer for what happened. Day 65. She came back, in yellow. Ready or not. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair and blue eyes. She raised 3 children alone after their father died. She walked door to door with a clipboard and 20,000 conversations until something that mattered was saved. She tended flower pots on her back patio that someone used to prop open her back doors on the night they took her. She showed her daughter, by everything she ever did, by everything she ever was, what it looks like to get up when the world falls apart. Her daughter got up this morning, in a yellow dress, at a desk she was not sure she still belonged at, in front of 30 million people who were watching, including almost certainly the person who took her. My joy will be my protest. My joy will be my answer. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. She deserves to be found. And whoever took her needs to understand that the blockchain is permanent, the DNA is being processed, the Board of Supervisors just put the investigation's leadership under oath, and the woman whose mother they tried to silence just came back to work in front of the country and said, ready or not, if you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI immediately. 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward from the Guthrie family and the FBI is over $1 million. Completely anonymous. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. We are here every single day. Drop a comment. What did Savannah's return mean to you today? And what are you expecting from the Nanos hearing tomorrow? We read every comment. Day 65. She came back. We will be back tomorrow for day 66, the most important day of this investigation yet.